Robin, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Welcome back to the Tuesday, March 16, 2021 special meeting of the Calaveras Board of Supervisors. Will you all please stand for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, we will be continuing closed session at the end of the day. We will report out after we are done with closed session at the end of the day.
Thank you.
At this time, we'll accept staff announcements. This is a time for county staff to provide updates of upcoming county events that may be of interest to the public. Staff.
We do not have any today.
Excellent. Nothing from Animal Services? Oh, I miss Lisa. All right. Mr. Mr. Toffenelli, my apologies.
Lisa got a big recognition, if you saw the email from the state, yes. Good job, Lisa, if you're listening.
With that, we'll move on to public health update. Public Health Services received an update presentation from staff on COVID-19 novel coronavirus, Mr. Sam Leach and Doug Archer.
Good morning, members of the board and residents of Calaveras County. Thank you for allowing me to present today, as always, and to continue serving as the interim Health and Human Services Director for Calaveras County. I'll start with the data. Number one, tests completed. We have over 35,000 tests completed, 35,002. This number jumped significantly from the 24,000s to 35,000, and I do not have an explanation yet from the state of what happened. My assumption is some larger testing facility wasn't being put in properly, so for some reason that number jumped, and I'll try to have answers for next week's meeting. COVID positive tests, we've had 1,946 positive cases to date. We currently have 9 active cases. We have had 1,887 recovered. We have 1 active hospitalization and 50 fatalities to date. Last week we received 2,270 vaccine doses. That was from March 8th to March 12th. So again, another pretty sizable allocation, and our inventory is pretty solid at this point. So it's good news. Vaccine doses administered to Calaveras County residents. As of this morning when I checked, we're at 14,653. And with a Frogtown clinic going today, we should be over 15,000 at the end of the day. A few important notes for the week. First, we entered the red tier last week. Last Tuesday, we finally were able to move from the purple tier that we had been in for quite some time and into the red tier where some indoor dining and other businesses practices could open up just a little bit. So happy to have made some progress there. This week our data continues to be in that red tier, so not fighting backwards, not quite moving forward yet, and keep in mind that we would need 2 weeks of data in a lower tier to move even further, less restrictive. So it looks like, for the foreseeable future, we're going to remain in the red tier. Okay, so that's it on that. As far as testing goes, we have COVID testing this week, actually today at Ironstone from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. There is also free COVID testing this Friday at the West Point Community Hall. So again, this Friday, March 19th at the West Point Community Hall, we have free COVID testing, and the hours on that one are 10 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Right now we're running clinics 2 days a week at our Frogtown site. We are open to do a lot of doses there at Frogtown, and the infrastructure is working out pretty well. Biggest problem is lines getting backed up right at the start of the day, and once we start to funnel people through, it moves pretty quickly. So really that first 30 minutes has been a little slower to start sometimes, just getting people in and out of the parking lot. And a lot of times what happens is people, no matter how many times we ask them to show up just before their appointment time, people who have appointments from 9 to 10, 10:30 even, are showing up right at 9 o'clock and kind of clogging it up. So we've had some longer lines to start the day, but once we get moving, it's been pretty efficient site over there. Things are moving really well, and a lot of happy folks leaving with their vaccines, as you can tell, frankly, by the numbers and the fact that we've been putting out 2,000 doses a week or more pretty consistently for the past month. So, Frogtown site is going well. Tuesdays and Thursdays tend to be appointments from 9 to 4. Now, where do you find those appointments? You go to the state's MyTurn site. So it's myturn.ca.gov, or just Google MyTurn, you're going to get there. So MyTurn is really the way to get appointments now in Calaveras County. And I would encourage all of our residents to go get signed up in MyTurn. That's really where you're going to find out when we put up new clinics, if we do a travel clinic. Of course, the Frogtown, which is our largest site and where we're most accessible, I know that you can still get appointments for this week. So if you're watching this and you're not sure if you qualify or when you can get an appointment, just know that, things are opening up a lot as far as the vaccine criteria, and they will continue to open pretty quickly if you listen to what the feds and the state are saying. I think we're going to keep working pretty quickly through those tiers. Now, one big thing that happened as of yesterday is that people with serious medical conditions are now eligible to get vaccinated. And I know that there's a lot of people in that category from age 16 and up who've been waiting to hear when they can get vaccinated. And these are people who are at serious risk of death and serious illness if they were to contract COVID. So I want to take just a moment and read some of the categories. And these are not, it's not exclusive to these, but these are some good examples. If you're suffering from cancer, chronic kidney disease, chronic pulmonary disease, Down syndrome, solid organ transplant, if you're pregnant, sickle cell disease, heart conditions, severe obesity, type 2 diabetes, and again, it's not exclusive to these. If you have a serious medical condition where you're at serious risk of death or serious illness if you were to contract COVID, then frankly, you should be going and signing up under that category. And we have vaccines to give. So, we want people doing that. We want to take care of these people. We want to make sure that our case counts are going down. We want to, frankly, not have any more fatalities. And taking care of our vulnerable population is a big part of that. So if you're listening to this or you know somebody, or you're listening to this and you know somebody who fits into one of these categories, please spread the word. Please tell the people that you know and care about to sign up in MyTurn and, sign up for one of our vaccine clinics that's coming up. So, we want to keep things moving. We want to put the vaccines into arms as soon as we get them. So let's please move along. So those are the big updates. Again, I can't say it enough. Go register in MyTurn. That's really where you're going to find more information and check on eligibility. So we'll be continuing to do that. All right. With that, Doug Archer from Mark Twain Medical Center. I want to give Doug a moment to give us an update on where they stand. Doug, you ready?
Yep. Thanks, Sam. Morning, Supervisors. Morning, Calaveras County. So I was just adding up the numbers. Right now, our main focus from the vaccine front is completing the second doses to complement the first doses already given. We've got ranges between 400 and 500 doses a week through this month planned for second dose administration. I think I've said this every meeting so far, so I'll just be consistent and say it again. I think the fact that the county health department and the hospital joined forces early on in this process continues to pay big dividends for our community, because I've talked to quite a few other counties and other hospitals, and they're struggling a little bit more than I think we are. So just hats off to Sam and his team for the support. So the Mark Twain side of the vaccine administration process, one of the concerns we've been having is, to do the vaccine clinics during the week, we take resources away from our clinic. And we're starting to get to a position where, people are wanting to come back and get their preventative care, their primary care, and people are re-engaging, which is a good thing. But we're seeing a backlog in our ability to get those patients scheduled for general primary care visits. So what we've decided to do from the hospital side is we're going to shift our vaccine operations to Saturdays. Keeping our same process, keeping what we're planning right now is basically 2 big blocks, 2 5-hour blocks. We believe that we can do 800 doses each Saturday, and in those 2 5-hour blocks. And the benefit is it'll take the pressure off of our weekday operations, our day job, so we can get back to seeing patients as well. So that's the plan. Look for, we're still shaping up the plans and the details, but look for some communication about that. Towards the end of March, we will launch the Saturday clinic. Our first proposed is April 10th. So look for communications about that. We are also moving to My Turn. So we'll have a benefit for our communities. They'll have a unified platform. They'll all be able to go to the same spot, same process, and get their vaccine scheduled. So that's all really good news. We have given, from the hospital side, I think the count's 6,800 doses to date. So between us and the county and everyone else, frankly, I think we're doing pretty well. It's about almost 15,000 doses now, so I think we have a lot to be proud of. And I saved the best news for last. We currently have 0 COVID patients in our hospital. We've had that a couple of times, but this is the longest run of 0 patients in our hospital, and we're very excited about that. We're busy. Our census is 13 today, which is, 8.5 is our budgeted census. So we're getting busy, and we're starting to see a lot more surgeries and kind of that elective stuff that people were a little reluctant to do before. So to me, from the hospital point of view, it seems like the world is thawing out a little bit, and we're taking that next step to return to something different. I won't say the N word. Normal is something that I don't know, I don't recognize anymore. But we're definitely starting to see patients and people coming back out and re-engaging in healthcare. That's my update. I'm happy to field any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Archer and Mr. Leach. I just want to start with, I want to thank you, Mr. Archer, and Dignity Health for having been excellent partners alongside public health. Possibly working up on 15,000 vaccines administered today. That's a significant number as opposed to our population in Calaveras County. You know, it's showing great progress. You know, I applaud you for that. One thing I want to follow up on is, you know, us thinking out, Mr. Leach, thinking about satellite vaccination site in Valley Springs. Some people may need easier access as they may not have transportation to San Andreas, for example. You know, I understand, you know, through the process we can't, just because of circulation issues and other things, you know, a satellite vaccine is not going to administer anything near what we can facilitate at Frogtown. That's why Frogtown's being used to the extent it has been and should continue to be used to that extent. But, you know, there are going to be people that don't necessarily have the transportation or the ability to make it that far. So, you know, I just would like that to stay on the radar as we proceed into the future. You know, and not just for Valley Springs, although, you know, I will talk about them just because, once again, you know, the 95252 zip code has over 13,000 people in it, and that's darn near, you know, a little less than a third of the county's population in that area. So, I mean, there needs to be easier access on an interim basis across the county for people that can't necessarily access Frogtown that easily. You know, I just want to say, Mr. Leach, with those tests being up, that percentage on that percentage, you know, it seems like we got, what, 11,000 tests that weren't reported before, according to your numbers this morning. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So that, at this point, really makes an impact on our positivity rate per test, does it not? Yeah. Well, you know, the state didn't necessarily count them before, so it kept us in purple longer. But, you know, I guess your guess is as good as mine on how that applies with our positivity rate and a large dump like that, because I would look at it being a much better percentage on the positivity rate.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, it definitely begs the question, but I don't know the answer to that. You know, yesterday morning I noticed that the count was 10,000 higher than what I expected it, or what it had been, and my assumption was we transposed a number on the data dashboard, and apparently that's not the case. But I don't have answers for what that was. Frankly, the state has always had different measures than what we often have. As you've heard throughout the pandemic, I mean, it's just always been an issue with the state tracking numbers and then what we track locally. So I'll try to bring some clarification in next week's meeting, but right now we would just be speculating on any of that. With regard to the Valley Springs testing, we did visit the Veterans Hall last Friday, and we have an agreement to start some clinics there. We just don't have a firm date to announce yet. But once again, if people will go to My Turn and register, including your Valley Springs residents, just go to My Turn and register. And once you're in there, then once you're eligible, you'll see the clinics that are in there. So if we do a clinic at the Veterans Hall 2 weeks from tomorrow, hypothetically, because it will probably be on a Wednesday, but if we do a clinic 2 weeks from tomorrow, that's where it will be set up. So we're prepared to start clinics there. It's a matter of, you know, we already have a pretty heavy rotation of what we're doing, and so it's trying to plan ahead and get a date clear on the calendar where we can either be there for a morning or an afternoon and try to get a couple hundred appointments scheduled.
Thank you, Mr. Leach. Any further board questions? Ms. Callaway.
Thank you. I have several, so I'll just put them out there. Mr. Leach said there was one in the hospital. Mr. Archer said there were none. Mr. Leach said there were 50 deaths, and yet the state site shows 49. It went to 50, back to 49. I just bring it up because I understand these are moving targets, and and if our two health gurus can't agree, and we rely on the state, it just kind of shows the anxiety to the public. On the ones who are seriously ill, is there something that they need to do? Do they have to be recommended by their doctor? Do they need to bring a doctor's note to show they have a serious medical condition? And is that for 16 and up? Thank you, Mr. Archer. Well, one, congratulations to the hospital on your grant. And if CJ helped, I want to make sure the county gets credit since you took them from us. And the fact that you're now moving to my turn I'm glad that issue's been determined. But does that mean that Mark Twain will be able to give shots to other than the 65 plus? And I think those are my questions for today.
All right.
Thank you.
Sam, I'll dive in and you can back clean up if that's okay. So in terms of the data, I believe the data is accurate, the one hospitalization. What I'm reporting is who's in Mark Twain Medical Center. And if we have a Calaveras resident that's, say, hospitalized at St. Joseph's in Stockton, that counts for the county, but of course it won't show up on my census. So I believe that's the discrepancy.
Thank you for that.
Sure. In regards to my turn, yes. So, essentially we're following the direction of both state and county health about what tiers we can administer to. And so with the county moving into that next tier, we follow. So when we're on the My Turn platform, we'll have those same types of screening processes and filtering processes for patients. And Sam, you'll probably need your help on this one, but I believe for the, what the patient needs to do, there's an attestation in the registration process that allows the patient to affirm that they have a chronic condition. It doesn't get very detailed, but, it's kind of some of it's because of confidentiality, patient health information. But the patient would have to attest that, yes, I have type 2 diabetes or whatever their ailment.
Yeah, that's correct. Look, we're not really allowed to, nor should we go in and verify the medical information. So what people need to do, frankly, is take care of themselves. And if you remember, over the past couple months, there's been several times where we've said, look, your turn is going to come, and if you have medical questions that you need to ask your medical provider so that you feel safe to go get the vaccine, then now was the time to do it, right? So if you haven't done that yet, that's really what people need to do, is reach out to their specific medical providers and get the questions answered that they have, right? I mean, it's really not much different than accessing, a pharmacy for your medications, right? I mean, the pharmacist might know a little bit about how the med works, but as far as how it gets prescribed, you would want to go to your doctor and make sure that you have those questions answered. So, I know I've given some personal examples. I have family members with organ transplants and such, somebody with rheumatoid arthritis, people that have specific medical questions where they want to make sure that there's no, side effects specific to their specific condition. They should work with their medical providers to get those answers for themselves. But as far as what they provide to us at the clinics, no, they're gonna do the attestation form and they're gonna show up and we're gonna let them in. Now, frankly, look, I understand that kind of begs the question of, well, are people just going to say that they have one so that they can come get a shot? Well, frankly, we have vaccine doses right now. So, it's not a free-for-all. if people are going to, lie to get a vaccine, they're still going to have to prove that they're a Calaveras resident. And in the end, we're trying to work toward herd immunity. And we have a lot of vaccine right now. I mean, this is not January. So, and frankly, it's not February. We're now well into March. The vaccines are flowing in. We're running pretty large-scale clinics twice a week at Frogtown. We're still running small travel clinics when we can, second dose appointments. That's not counting what the pharmacies are doing, which frankly it sounds like they're doing a lot. And if anything, I hear maybe they've been more liberal with their application of some of the tier systems than we have. So we, as a public health team, are kind of constantly having to ride the wave and balance between, the integrity of fidelity of trying to adhere to what the state expects and not letting people jump the line, which was so critical back in December and January, because, we'd get 100 vaccines. We need to make sure that those went to the people they were allocated for. Then we start getting to the point where we're getting 1,000 vaccines or 700 vaccines, and we notice that things started to open up. We got all the 65 plus people moving through. Then they started to move to food and ag. Well, now, as you can tell, we've had weeks where we're getting a couple thousand vaccines or more. In fact, one week we got 3,700 vaccines. So we start building up an inventory, and now we're saying, hey, come show up at Frogtown. And frankly, the registration, we've had good numbers, but we have yet to get to the point where we're sold out, so to speak. So people can make their appointments. We want our Calaveras residents getting vaccinated. As you know, we're working toward a May 1st national projection of having everybody be eligible. And frankly, I think based on the trends that we're seeing, both at Mark Twain and through public health, I think that's the way to go. And it may even be a little bit sooner than that. We'll see how it goes. But look, we want our Calaveras residents getting vaccinated. We do want to make sure that the early priorities are still working through in the way they're intended, but we're also following the state guidance, which says we are not able to, confirm or verify the medical conditions. So hopefully that helps. I realize that, you board members, you guys get updates from me, and sometimes it feels like, wait, 2 weeks ago you were saying this, 3 weeks ago you were saying that, and that's just been the nature of change throughout this pandemic, and especially with the vaccine rollout that I've been here to see through. So, in 3 weeks from now, 4 weeks from now, I'm sure I'll be telling you something very different. And I don't think it's going to be too many more months before, frankly, we have vaccines sitting on shelves and we're really working hard to, try to motivate people to come get the vaccine. So that's what I meant. If you remember last week, and I think maybe even the time before, I said, we went through one wave where people were screaming at us to get the vaccines and convinced that we were holding them back from them. And it was more of a panic kind of mode. Now we're kind of in that middle phase, which will ultimately end up in a transition. And, we got 19, 20-year-olds that are eligible right now in food and agriculture, right? And it's just a different perspective from some of them. I've done some personal outreach even and said, hey, you guys are eligible now. If you want to get vaccinated, okay. When I can. That's a lot different than, if you're in your late 70s or early 80s and you've been living at home for the past year, isolated, and afraid that if you go to the grocery store, frankly, you might contract this virus and it's either going to hospitalize you or kill you. So just different levels of anxiety, and that obviously has manifested through some of the demand and supply and demand issues that we're seeing. They kind of play out in waves. So I'm just trying to be transparent with you guys and tell you what I see. I don't really necessarily control all of that, but just try to get it and react as we see it. So kind of long-winded rant, but I'm trying to paint the picture for everybody. Are there more questions off of that?
I have one more. Mr. Archer, I believe you said the last time you spoke with us that Dignity was not going to be giving any allocations to Mark Twain. Has that changed, or is all of your allocation now coming from public health? Thank you.
Sure. So Dignity Health is, last week, Well, let me back up. When the TPA process started, and Blue Shield took over the management of the administration process, we were told that we wouldn't be receiving any more hospital-based allocations. Last week, we did get a message that the state was sending Johnson & Johnson vaccine to Dignity Health, but it was only 5,000 doses for the entire state of California. And it's really specific. So you probably know the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is a single-dose administration. So it makes it ideal for settings like inpatient hospital, some of the homeless outreach campaigns where you may not get that opportunity for a second dose. So Mark Twain was allocated 100 doses of Johnson & Johnson, but it really is specific to inpatient population. So what I said before I think is still true. Dignity Health won't be receiving a regular allocation of vaccine, but then, it changed last week and they sent 5,000 to the state to Dignity for the state of California.
And we've been, in public health, we've been trying to share with Mark Twain as long as we can. Now, my understanding at present, and this is one of my big frustrations with the state, is, they'll just keep saying different things, right? But they get this contract, they get this third-party administrator in Blue Shield, and Blue Shield's been very nice working with us. I appreciate that they've been trying to listen to our concerns. But then we get a copy of the MOU that says, once we sign the MOU, we're not going to be able to share allocations with our partner. And that's really frustrating. Right now I'm planning to, obviously at some point we're probably going to have to sign that MOU. We're continuing to review it with legal. But I have my concerns with signing that, because frankly, if the state would let us keep working with our largest partner here in Mark Twain, we can provide a much more efficient and effective, effort here. So we're doing the best we can to manage that. We're continuing to share doses with them as of now. But again, once we sign the MOU, if we're not allowed to, then the idea is they will be on with the third-party administrator and my turn as well, and they'll be getting their own allocation. The problem with that is demand comes and goes, as well as capacity to provide. So in the early stages, frankly, Mark Twain, if you look at this as a relay race, Mark Twain was really carrying the baton for quite some time. And when Doug talks about doing, I think he said over 6,000 doses that just Mark Twain has done. So what's that, 40% roughly of all the doses that have gone into arms of Calaveras residents? And that's the effort that we're so thankful to them for. And it's frustrating to then have a third-party administrator come in and not only cut off their supply, but also cut off our ability to get them supply out of our allocation. So it's kind of like, imagine if they're giving us 2,000 vaccines a week and we can only do, let's say, 1,600. There's no reason we can't be using all 2,000 or 2,200 vaccines if we're able to use our partners properly. So, it's gotten a little sloppy and it's frustrating, but right now we're not sitting on piles and piles of vaccines or anything like that. It's just been very tedious for us to manage that. So in that relay race thing, right now we're carrying the baton a little bit, and we have been for the past few weeks where, we're doing the larger clinics at Frogtown and some smaller outreach clinics, and frankly, a lot of second dose stuff that we're still doing. So, we're running pretty hard right now, and we'll keep doing that for a little while, and we'll see how the race changes from here. But I just want to say, it's nice to have such a great relay partner who's done so much with us, and I think they'll be back up and carrying the baton, at some point. It might be April, it might be early April, it could be more toward mid-April. But for right now, we're running hard, appreciate the support. We have meetings at least once, usually twice a week between Doug's team and my team. And so, it's been a good countywide effort, and you can see that, and I hope that the residents of Calaveras County are seeing that too. And I'm hearing less complaints about not being able to get a vaccine. That's probably a big understatement, but it was pretty rough in January, as you all know, because you all were hearing it too.
Thank you, Mr. Leach. To follow up on that, my experience is a memorandum of understanding is subject to negotiation. Generally, it's not just handed to you and you sign it and it is what it is. As you continue to try to negotiate with the state based on the premise that you just set forth on it, let us continue to work with our partners. We can do the best job that way. And also, more leverage to that point is, if possibly Mark Twain is given first vaccines, we don't want those wasted not being able to share the second vaccine dose with them if that such is the case. But that's just my input on the situation. Any further board member questions, statements? Thank you. At this time, I'll take public comment. We'll give it 15 seconds unless someone's already raising their hand. Nothing yet, Ms. Simpson?
There's no public comment at this time.
Thank you very much. With that, unless there's any final statements from Mr. Archer and Mr. Leach, I just want to thank you both for the hard work you put in. Let's keep up the good work, and then and we'll move on from there. Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, we'll move on to recognitions and acknowledgements. Item 6, Clerk of the Board of Supervisors, adopt a proclamation recognizing March 2021 as American Red Cross Month in Calaveras County. Ms. Fullendorf.
Okay. So, now therefore proclaimed by the Board of Supervisors, Calaveras County, proclamation recognizing March 2021 as American Red Cross Month in Calaveras County. Whereas the American Red Cross has touched many lives in Calaveras County, as well as across the country and around the world. Whereas during the American Red Cross Month, we thank those who contribute to the mission of Red Cross, whether through time, money, or blood, and we invite others to support the American Red Cross in helping people in need down the street, across the country, and around the world. And whereas the American Red Cross is synonymous with helping people and has been doing so for more than 132 years. Throughout the past year, the American Red Cross has launched hundreds of disaster relief operations in the United States to help people affected by fires, flood, hurricane, tornado, and COVID-19, which has not changed the American Cross mission, and we are still providing the same type of support as previous. To help keep people safe, we are following the guidance of CDC and public health authorities and have put in place additional precautions. Some of these steps include social distancing protocols, face coverings, health screenings, and enhanced cleaning methods. The ongoing coronavirus pandemic has only compounded the devastation wrought by these disasters. The Gold Country region, which includes Calaveras County and the Motherlode area, responded to disasters here in California like the most recent 2019-2020 devastating wildfire season, as well as disasters elsewhere. In 26 counties that make up the Gold Country region provide thousands of residents with information and assistance. Whereas in Calaveras County, the Red Cross worked tirelessly in 2020 through its single employee and 5 volunteers to support our residents when disaster strikes with emergency assistance. In 2020, Calaveras Red Cross volunteers gave food, clothing, and shelter to 307 adults and 51 children throughout Calaveras County because their homes were devastated by home fires or evacuation from the Walker fire, Salt fire, and others. This made it possible for families to have a safe place to stay and the basic necessities of life as they began to slowly recover. The American Red Cross also provides 24-hour support to all members of the military, veterans, and their families, and provides training in CPR, aquatic safety, sheltering, and first aid. Whereas for nearly 100 years, the United States presidents have called the American people to support the Red Cross and its humanitarian mission. Our communities depend on American Cross, and it's because it's not a government agency. The American Cross depends solely on support from the public to continue its work. This is especially important in these challenging economic times. With impact the American Red Cross and many other people in our communities and across the nation. Now therefore be it resolved, the Calaveras County Board of Supervisors proclaim March 2021 as the American Red Cross Month in Calaveras County. We encourage all Americans to support this organization and its noble humanitarian mission. You can help by donating, giving blood, or becoming a Red Cross volunteer.
Thank you, Ms. Bollendorf. Do we have Debbie Calco or Curly White on hand?
Yes, we do.
Before we bring them on, any further comments or questions by the board?
Debbie?
Yes. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we are. Thank you.
Okay. I just want to say thank you very much for the proclamation. And through COVID, it has been a challenge doing things in a different way, but we are still very active in the community, still providing care and outreach to our communities in every way that we can. And we thank everyone. We are still welcoming anyone who would like to volunteer in any aspect to please reach out and be a part of our Red Cross team. And I'm not sure whether Carol Lee was able to join us.
I don't see her on the call, Debbie.
Okay.
Debbie, I just want to thank you for spending the time to be here, and we appreciate everything the Red Cross is able to do with the walkers and the other fires that were partially in my district, in District 4 this year. You know, your continuing work and everything is much appreciated by our constituents and neighbors.
Thank you very much. We continue to prepare and be ready for anything that should happen within the territory. We are actually working on possibly doing some town hall meetings and helping people become more aware and prepared by doing them through Zoom for our communities. So thank you.
If there's no further comments by the Board of Supervisors, I would like to give the opportunity for public comment. We'll give it a moment.
There is no other public comment at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Simpson. At this time, I will entertain a motion.
So move, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Toffenelli.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Fullendorf. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes on 5-0 vote of the board. And Ms. Fullendorf.
And I will repeat again, sorry, that now therefore be it resolved, the Calaveras County Board of Supervisors proclaim March 2021 as American Red Cross Month in Calaveras County. We encourage all Americans to support this organization and its noble humanitarian mission.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fullendorf. And thank you, Debbie, and everyone with Red Cross. With that, we'll move on to public comment. Any item of interest to the public that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board and is not posted in the consent or regular agendas may be addressed during the public comment period. California law prohibits the board from taking action on any matter which is not posted on the agenda unless it is determined to be an emergency by the Board of Supervisors. If public comment is completed before the 30-minute allotted time period, the board may immediately move to the next order of business. If public comment is not completed during the allotted time period, it will be continued as the last item of business in order to provide an opportunity for the remainder of comments to be heard. Ms. Simpson, we'll give it the 15 seconds at least.
There's no public comment at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Simpson. With that, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Consent agenda items are expected to be routine and non-controversial. They will be acted upon by the board at one time without discussion. Any board member, staff member, or interested party may request removal of an item from the consent agenda for later discussion. Is there any board members that would like to remove item 7 from the consent agenda? None? Any staff members? Public?
None at this time.
Thank you. With that, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda in its entirety of number 7.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Toffnelli. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Fullendorf. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes on a 5-0 vote of the board. At this time, before we start the regular agenda, I would like to take a 10-minute break. Madam Clerk. We good? Regular agenda. Number 8, PowerPoint. Administrative Office establish an ad hoc committee for the Animal Services Shelter and Calaveras County Jail and appoint 2 supervisors to said committee. Krista Von Latta.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Krista Von Latta from the County Administrative Office. We have before us here an item to establish an ad hoc committee for jail repairs and animal services. As a reminder, on February 16th, that the board directed staff to return with this item. The idea behind it is to appoint the 2 supervisors, establish the committee for a period of 1 year. The committee would then, the supervisors who the board were to appoint today would work with county staff and other appropriate parties in order to bring back at least quarterly recommendations and an annual report back to the board on the state and recommended courses of actions with respect to those 2 facilities. Were the board to establish the committee, the CAO and the appointed board members would work together to take next steps and begin the process of bringing back recommendations to the board. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions the board might have.
Any questions?
So if it's for 1 year, it would not be a Brown Act ad hoc, is that correct?
That is correct. And in fact, as a result of that, the two members of the committee would in fact be the board members. No other members would be appointed. There would be no need to agendize the meetings. And for the same reason, it needs to be limited in scope and limited in duration. So the proposed duration is 1 year with an anticipated disbanding in April 2021, which I would expect and recommend would be when the committee would bring back its full annual report with its recommendations for next steps.
Could you remind me why the jail is part of the ad hoc committee?
So it's come to light, it's been known for some time, both with the jail, county administration, and facilities, that there have been outstanding issues as it relates to maintenance in the jail that are ongoing and have the potential to be rather costly. It is the recommendation of the administrative office to form this committee such that we can establish a plan to address these issues before lack of maintenance becomes a larger issue than it already has become. And that is why we have included the jail along with animal services, where just by way of recollection, I think we are all advised that there have been numerous and ongoing recommendations from various parties, including our external, including our grand jury, rather, regarding the state of the animal services facility.
Any further questions, Ms. Callaway?
No, I just have a comment.
Okay.
Is that all right? On animal services, the focus is looking at possibly putting a bond together to build the facility. I know Mr. Garamendi and I alluded to wanting funding when we had the midterm budget. So I guess, would that be part of what the ad hoc committee would be part of, Ms. Von Latta?
Indeed, that is specifically the type of thing that where the ad hoc committee, I anticipate and recommend, would work with. The administrative office is aware that Focus is interested in facilitating a bond measure, and I expect that that would be one of the very first things the ad hoc committee would do, although clearly the administrative office would defer to the members of the ad hoc committee in terms of direction in that regard.
Okay, I would hope that the ad hoc committee would also consider a barn separate from the idea of a shelter, which we could do now. That's all.
You mean for separate from the shelter, but to be included for animal services, or?
The bond would be looking at a shelter for dogs and cats. But what's also needed is a barn of some kind, because we have
Horse and
larger
livestock
and
issues.
goats. We have livestock,
Yes.
correct, and they're out in the elements with nothing. And we don't think of animal services as livestock, but in this county, they're
It happens
an integral
frequently.
part of our animal services.
Agreed, Ms. Callaway. I think that would be part of the discussion for the ad hoc committee as we move forward. So I think that would be opened up with the animal services discussion.
So who else is on the committee besides two supervisors?
I was going to bring that up. Sheriff DiBasilio did reach out to me, and if we continue on as the recommendation says, including animal services and the Calaveras County Jail, he would like to be part of that ad hoc committee also. And I would suggest that he would be included on that conversation, as he is an intricate part of the county jail.
If I may just make one minor point of clarification, and I know this is an annoying lawyer thing, but the ad hoc committee is actually only properly comprised of 2 board members, period, full stop. No one else can be on the ad hoc committee. That said, of course, those 2 board members who comprise that committee can and should meet with any number of staff or other folks who will be able to provide information to them and help them with their process.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards, for your rather unannoying input.
Miss Edwards, it is annoying.
I know.
I mean, why can't the treasurer or debt advisory be part of the
I honestly could not tell you, Supervisor Callaway, why the legislature chose to draft this provision as they did, but it is very clear that in order to be an ad hoc committee, which is outside the scope of the Brown Act, meaning it does not have to comply with all of the Brown Act's provisions, it may consist of less than a quorum of the board and less than a quorum of the board only. Again, practically speaking, that just means that that's the committee, and then they can meet with whomever they like, but technically no one else can be on that committee. If they are, then it becomes a Brown Act committee.
So,
I don't have a good answer for why.
At that point, the ad hoc committee could include those people within the conversation if they chose. They just aren't officially part of the ad hoc committee.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Did you want any recommendations, Mr. Chair?
You know, I would accept recommendations. At the same time, I have some recommendations of my own. So if you so choose, Ms. Callaway.
Did you want public comment first?
Yeah, let's go ahead and go forward with public comment. We'll give it 15 seconds, and then we'll finish working together as the board on it. Nothing, Ms. Simpson?
No, there's no public comment at this time.
Thank you very much. Ms. Callaway.
I'd like to recommend Mr. Tuffanelli and Mr. Garamendi. My reasons are Mr. Tuffanelli was involved in the jail from the back to when it all started and was built and so forth. And I think he brings some history and perspective and to the jail. And Mr. Garamendi, because he's simpatico with how I feel on animal services.
Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Supervisor Callaway, for your kind words. Appreciate that. However, I do not believe that my passion can match your passion for the animals in this project that you've worked on for decades. You know, if we're getting close to bringing it home, I think it would be very appropriate that you were on the committee to bring it in. That would be my suggestion. But certainly I agree with you on Supervisor Toffanelli.
Thank you, Mr. Garamendi. Ms. Voldorf, Mr. Toffanelli?
I want to thank both Supervisor Callaway and Supervisor Garamendi for their kind words. Obviously, we have two recommendations between two of them, each recommended the other one on it. So I don't have a preference, which either one we work out is fine. Just want to get this established and get going on something which the county jail, as Maria just pointed out, I've been involved in, with the exception of 4 years when it was finalized, for a while. And there are some issues there that really need to be resolved so we can present something at least complete to the county constituents that are actually paying through a bond for this project. So.
I completely agree with Mr. Toffanelli when it, on the one hand. On the other hand, Ms. Callaway, you've been beating this drum for animal services for quite some time. I think we're all in agreement with you. I would appreciate you being able to step up, and hopefully we can put the exclamation point behind this instead of the question down the road, with your help in finalizing. So with that, I will, if there's no further comment, I will accept a proposed motion with members for the committee.
Mr. Chair, I would make a motion to compose the committee of Supervisor Toffanelli and Supervisor Callaway, if she's willing to serve on it, We haven't asked her. I hope she would be. So if she's willing, then that would be my proposal.
With it set forward as within the recommendation. Ms. Callaway, do you accept?
Yeah, plus you get my history on the jail besides, so you get more than you're asking for.
Excellent. Excellent. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
With that, all those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Passes on a 5-0 vote of the board. Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, we'll move on to our regular agenda item number 9, PowerPoint, Administrative Office. Establish a standing Brown Act Committee, Strategic and Financial Planning Committee, appoint 2 supervisors to said committee, and appoint the County Administrative Officer, the Auditor Controller, and the Treasurer Tax Collector to said committee. Ms. Krista Von Lotta.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Krista Von Lotta, County Administration. I will present a PowerPoint to you today to discuss whether the board should direct staff to establish a standing Brown Act committee that would be called the Strategic Planning and Financing Committee. And with that, I will share my screen and take you through PowerPoint. Okay. So, also on February 16th, during a study session regarding study sessions, among other things, and strategic planning, the board directed county administration to come back with an item to discuss whether to establish an actual standing Brown Act committee. So as opposed to the ad hoc committee that the board just established, this would in fact be a committee subject to the Brown Act. So we would agendize and abide by all of the Brown Act. And one of the upsides of that is that rather than being entirely limited in scope to the extent that the ad hoc committee would be, or limited, for example, in the members who could be appointed as with respect to the ad hoc. In this case, it's a standing committee, can address a wider range of ongoing issues, and the board can, in fact, appoint whoever it wishes to be on the committee. So why do it? Why is it a good idea to establish this committee? First off, it's strategic planning and the related financing. By definition, it takes a team. It takes getting buy-in from everyone from the board to department heads, community stakeholders, and staff who ultimately will be doing the hard work. So at the end of the day, it makes sense to do a committee like this. You'll note as we move through this PowerPoint that the focus is on the strategic planning aspects of it at this point, but clearly we know that any strategic plan will require just as much careful financial planning in order to carry it out. So that's a fundamental principle of why this recommendation is being made. In addition, to answer the questions for the board, I actually expect that there will be several questions that come from the board that in fact are exactly the types of questions that the committee would be able to address. In addition, whether we receive those questions today or not, questions from the public, outreach from the public. So one of the main focuses will be for the committee would be to be able to hone those down into questions that the committee can look at, and then bring back recommendations on what the answers are or could be. Also, just to keep things moving, to keep the process on track. We know that there has been kind of fits and starts of the idea of strategic planning in this county over at least the last 4 years or so, and quite frankly, prior to that. And a committee like this would be a way to actually keep things moving and hopefully continue to develop the strategic plan, but carry out the process that's quite frankly not entirely reasonable to be done in open session. There's just simply put too many moving parts. So to be able to distill down for the board what those decisions, policy level decisions need to be, make recommendations, and not lose sight of the fact that strategic planning is a process. And so I would say the last thing and the most important ultimately is transparency. The fact that it's a Brown Act committee, it's a standing committee, it will be agendized, will be an opportunity for the public to participate in the process and have its voice heard all throughout to the extent that members of the public wish to do so. We'll talk a little bit later in this presentation about what some of that transparency could look like. But at this point, the proposed initial numbers, and this is just a recommendation to get started, would be 2 supervisors, the county administrative officer, the auditor controller, and the treasurer tax collector. The rationale here being that it's a board of 7, and then the recommendation when we get to the end of this presentation will be that one of the first formational meeting, should the board establish this committee, would include an item regarding which other positions, which other people that committee may recommend the board appoint to it. So just kind of by way of what we've got in place now, the way to think about what some of our strategic style or other county plans are. We often don't think of it this way, but quite frankly, the annual budget is a short-term countywide plan that reflects the board's direction and priorities for how the county staff is going to deliver services during the course of the fiscal year. Additionally, we all know of the general plan that recently was adopted and is a countywide plan that affects the entire county. Likewise, the strategic plan, although we don't have one, is the same level of high level, or all-encompassing rather is a better way to put it, plan that would ultimately tie in to, and should tie in, I hope by this time next year with the annual budget, and would reflect things like the strategic plan, department-specific plans, and we'll talk about that in a few moments here. But the purpose of the strategic plan, just to take a step back and think about that, is that it's a way for the community and the board and department heads and staff, other stakeholders, to express their vision of what the county, what we would like the county to be in a clear way. And for the board, it's particularly useful in having conversations with all of the different stakeholders, staff, constituents, and whatnot. It's a tether. It's to bring us back when we have those difficult conversations sometimes regarding allocating scarce resources, or whether to make a decision about whether to do project A that's not been contemplated yet, or project B when we're looking at the budget, and which we'll be doing soon, by the way. So it's a way to stay connected to what all of the different stakeholders in the county are hoping that will be addressed from a policy perspective at the board level and carried out by staff ultimately to make for a better community as we go forward. And also because we need a roadmap. The way that we've been doing it in this county is more like month-to-month budgeting, right? Only we do a year-to-year annual budget. And so we know that the way to get around that short-term thinking, one of them is to have a strategic plan that is built out with the assistance, guidance, hard work, and advice of all of our different stakeholders, such that when we put this collective vision down to paper and start to break it down into manageable parts and think about how to finance it, we can actually look past that short-term thinking and maintain mid-range and long-range thinking such that we can actually attain some of the larger goals that have been a little outside of reach for our county in recent years. I also really want to focus on the fact that the strategic plan is not written in stone. It is a living document. It is a process document. If you noticed, there were 3 items attached to this agenda item. This is the PowerPoint for the presentation, but I wanted you to be able to see what a working draft, that would be the Word document, the document that if the committee is established, would be working in redlining so that the board can clearly see the changes that are being recommended. But then the draft of the formal plan, which is the other PowerPoint that's attached, such that we can visualize where that hard work is going to land in a strategic plan that then will be updated and modified as the committee does its work. The people assisting the committee do theirs. Recommendations are brought back to the board, and ultimately decisions are made at your board by your board, incorporated into the county budget, and the plan is implemented as we move forward over the course of the next 3 to 5 years. So the basic place where we started, and this was back in 2018, there were conversations, and in June of 2018, the budget at that time included the mission, vision, values of the board. So the mission statement, serving, strengthening, and supporting our community. The vision statement, a community of agricultural, historic, and recreational abundance where residents and visitors enjoy safety and prosperity. And values. So integrity, balance, resilience, service. So this is really the kind of top level starting point for the plan where everything else should flow. And what's being recommended is that the second step, which I've referenced here but not included, is to distill that even a little bit further, and this would be a good example of work for the committee, but to create guiding principles that are really kind of the next level of what these mission, vision, values translate to in practical language, in practical terms. So, but a huge point about the strategic plan is to get the definitions really solidified in our minds, and that itself will take a little bit of time, but such that we're speaking the same language, so that whether we're talking at the board level, talking at the committee level, engaging with the community or other community stakeholders, or each other and our colleagues. The idea is to really instill, and this is part of the rationale for doing a standing committee that would report out at least quarterly, if not monthly, depending, is to really instill these ideas into our language, into the way that we operate and communicate with each other, so that we are on the same page. And then ultimately, we'll see when we do things like budget process, I hope 1 year from now, to really be able to embed these concepts into that process, which would be, again, a huge function of the work of the committee if the board creates it. And so here is generally what the strategic planning process looks like, at least to the extent that we've contemplated it in this county right now. But so mission, vision, values, we do have guiding principles. I would say we've got a couple ideas, but at the end of the day, that's, again, something that the committee could take up. Strategic plan pillars. These are the strategic directives that the board was shown back on February 16th. They haven't been formally adopted. They certainly could be, again, work for the committee to make recommendations to the board and ultimately for the board to decide at a policy level. And then we start to get into kind of the nitty-gritty, so to speak, right? So the goal of, if we've got a plan pillar that is stewardship, then what do the goals of that plan pillar, what would they be in order to achieve it? And further, then once we establish what those goals are, what are the actual objectives? What are the steps that will be recommended in order to achieve those goals? And then when we get down to implementation and key indicators, all along the way, we want to be engaging with the community. We want to be engaging with department heads. But the work will shift somewhat when it comes down to, for example, implementation, where this is an area where strong communication and work with department heads, because ultimately, to be successful, many of these strategic plan initiatives would have to be implemented at the department level. And then a conversation for everyone to have is also, and this would be the last thing, but to formulate the key indicators that would help us know what our benchmarking, what our timelines, et cetera, were for whether the plan was working. And if it's not working for, let's say, one particular goal or objective tied to it, then what might we recommend change in order to change that outcome and get back on track? So recommended next steps are these. Establish the Strategic Planning and Financing Committee. Appoint 2 supervisors to serve on the committee. Appoint the following department heads to serve on the committee, at least initially: this county administrative officer, the auditor controller, and the treasurer tax collector. So from there, the CAO would schedule an initial meeting, so that would be 5. And the tentative agenda recommended for the initial meeting, which again, all of these are just recommendations, food to get the conversation at the board started, but these are the recommended next steps at this time. The tentative agenda for the first meeting would be to consider recommendations regarding additional members, the creation of bylaws, which are not required, but that may be advisable depending on the will of the committee. Contemplating how we might conduct a poll of department heads to get at least some initial feedback on what this, how they see this process working, and a third-party facilitator, and whether or not that would be advisable, or at least something that the committee might want to consider or recommend to the board at some point. This is not an exclusive list of what items could be for the original or initial meeting, but I think this would be a good place to start. And so with that, I'm happy to hear any discussion or by all means any questions from the board.
Thank you, Ms. Von Lara. May I add that, not only to stay on track for implementation, this committee will continue its work as we proceed in adjusting goals, as a strategic plan is a fluid document through time. It's it may change every 2 years the board changes, and you know, as, you know, with the adjustment of goals, you know, through time, you know, some things may not work for us, and may find better ways to work through this by changing our goals. And I think that, you know, through time, it's good to have this type of committee to facilitate, you know, the document continuing into the future, even after a vast amount of time is done to get done finalizing a strategic plan. You know, it's not going to happen tomorrow, but once we get to that point, it's going to continue to be revised and adjusted as the county changes and moves forward in the future. But with that, I'll leave any questions from the board, any statements? Ms. Callaway.
Is the Finance Committee supposedly replacing debt advisory? How do the two dovetail?
No, that would not be the recommendation. The Debt Advisory Committee, which admittedly has, I would expect to have overlapping members, is a separate committee with a separate function.
Can you explain the Debt Advisory Committee's function so that, you know, we can hear it in contrast to what this is being put forward as?
Sure. So, and I invite, should the auditor, controller, the treasurer, tax collector, or any other, the assessor, member of the committee wish to jump in here, by all means, please do. But, so the Debt Advisory Committee is engaged anytime the county is considering taking on additional debt, would be a great example. And so, for example, when the HVAC project was being contemplated over the course of the last year and a half or so, the Debt Advisory Committee was engaged in that process. The Debt Advisory Committee makes recommendations on a high level. There is a policy that is attached to the Debt Advisory Committee that, by the way, I believe needs to be updated. The function of this financing committee would be to do the legwork and the recommendations, first of all, at a very, on an annual level as it relates to the county budget, also to additional funding streams. So those are things that would fall outside of the purview of the Debt Advisory Committee. However, were it to be identified that additional financing might be required, that would be something where this financing committee would do some of the legwork, at least to get to the point where we were able to make recommendations to the board, and then once the board gave direction to the Debt Advisory Committee, or whatever the process would look like at that point. But they really would be two distinctly different things with different functions. Was that a sufficient answer?
To me, it was. Ms. Callaway? Thank you. Is there any further questions by Ms. Callaway?
Not at this minute.
No, okay.
It is on.
Okay.
I know.
Any other board members? If there's no, Mr. Toffenelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Sarah. Sarah, this is a Brown Act committee. So, and it's a standing Brown Act committee. So is there any reason if 3 supervisors decided they were interested in serving on this committee that it could be expanded to 3?
It's still supposed to be less than a quorum of the board, because otherwise it's a board, it would be the board potentially discussing county business and taking action outside of a board of supervisors meeting, which is still a no-no. So the short answer is no, it has to be 2 or fewer.
Okay, thank you.
If there's no further questions by the rest of the board, we will go to public comment, and then we will finish our deliberations after that.
There's no public comment at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Simpson. Board members. Well, Ms. Callaway.
If you're asking for recommendations, I'll give you two. If you're not,
I'm always open to recommendations.
I'd like to, and I'll tell you why, I'd like to recommend Supervisor Fallendorf in that she brings a perspective to this board of city government and the kinds of things they've done there, and it would be nice to have a different perspective than, not better, just a different perspective. And I'd like to recommend Supervisor Garamendi, unless he bugs out again, because of his work on RCRC and the kinds of things they've been involved in their strategic planning and their financing. And if you listen to him over the last 2 years on his reporting out on RCRC, I think he would bring a perspective to this committee that would be different than how we maybe normally look at things.
Thank you, Ms. Callaway. Actually, with my heart into this and everything, I was going to come forward with the same recommendation from my perspective. I think these are two people with a vast amount of experience. That's not necessarily in our normal box as Calaveras County. And it's time for us to move forward on something. I think these are two people that have great experience to these ends, and I think that it would be beneficial to all of us having these two people on the committee. Mr. Garamendi, your light's on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for your kind words, Supervisor Callaway. I might take offense with the bug out, but I think I was met with good humor, and I'm taking it as such. Mr. Chair, I want to thank you and the Vice Chair for all the work that you guys put in on this as well, and Ms. Falmata, thank you very much. I mean, this is a big improvement from where we were a very short time ago, and kudos all around, so thank you. I guess my only question is, and while I'm flattered to be nominated to be on this, I guess I have to question whether we should be doing this at all. I know that if I wasn't on this committee, I'd be very concerned. I know he's on this committee, but I would be very concerned about my fellow two supervisors making a lot of budget decisions, a lot of policy decisions that are really the purview of this board as a whole. I would hate to be, I would not want to be part of a carval that was doing that in a back room and then bringing it out here for all you guys, because a lot of what we're talking about doing in the strategic plan is specifically our job. I'm always concerned about us as a board moving into an executive level and trying to manage day-to-day operations. Every time I've seen that happen, it's never a good thing. Sometimes it has to happen in moments of crisis or vacancies. I understand that, but I'm concerned about forming a committee to do what I think is the board as a whole's job. Financing in particular gives me great concerns. Terms like keeping on track for implementation. I think that works okay on things like the ad hoc committee that Supervisor Toffanelli and I worked on, but we also know that we have to stay as the supervisors and let our executives do the executive work. So I'm just really concerned, and I hope this board will take very seriously that in many ways we'd be punting, and that concerns me. So I'd be interested in what the rest of the board thinks about that concept, but I'm certainly flattered by the opportunity to serve.
Thank you, Mr. Garamendi. I think with us bringing this forward, working with the administration's office, Supervisor Fullendorf and I had these conversations a little bit in depth. It's a legitimate concern. At the same time, this is the vessel to get a brunt of the work and take input from the different departments so that it can be brought back to the board. At that point, the board does deliberate on it. So I believe, maybe this is a discussion we need to have, that, there is the filter there, but at the same time, we need a clear path forward to bring things back to the board so that we can move forward in a distinct fashion to finish the strategic plan, and then, carry it on in the future. I think this is the best vessel to get to that point, and the board will have the final say in its entirety after that point. Do you have anything to say to that, Ms. Fullendorf?
I would agree with that statement and just reiterate that by no means is the expectation that this board is, the standing committee is making the decision for the board. It's merely doing the work and getting the perspective of staff and those out of the committee to better create policy to bring back to the board for the final decision to mirror what the budget is. And in past conversations, we've talked about what are our reserve policies, what are our other financial policies that we had in mid-year, and this would be that vessel that would be able to do the outreach, get the feedback, bring back that to the board, and make a decision. Or if the board doesn't want that, make those decisions, that's fine, and tell that committee to go back and keep working on it. It's just a vessel. It's a vessel to get this going, because I think, and from my understanding, was a lot of this was going to be done in special meetings, and the realization that this is going to take more than just special meetings to get a strategic plan. There's a lot more work, a lot more facilitating that is going to take a lot of the board's time up in normal meetings and special meetings, and we need to get this somewhat fast-tracked through.
Thank you, Ms. Fullendorf. And it just, not just fast-tracked, but we all realize it takes time. It's the facilitator, as she said, the vessel, for us to continue making progress on it. And if the board doesn't like what it brings forward, then at that point we can say so and give it direction to bring something else back. And the board still has the point of making the final decision on this as we continue forward.
And I may add as well is if the board so chooses that this is not the vessel, then the question becomes, what is the vessel to get the strategic planning done? And from the last meeting, it was to create a standing Brown Act committee to go forward. And if what is presented today is not what the appetite of the board is, then what is? What is our expectation to get this through and get the participation from county staff to move forward in the goals and visions of the county?
Thank you, Ms. Fullendorf. Mr. Garamendi?
I mean, this is a discussion, so I'm glad we go around. I agree with Amanda. There's a lot of work to be done, and we're not afraid of doing that work by any means. But there have been criticisms historically of groups doing stuff and presenting it to this board as a fait accompli. And then additionally, you've got two board members who are going to be serving in many ways as staff for sit back and forth. It's new, it's a change, and I just want to make sure that everybody understands the consequence of what we're doing here before we all agree on it. And if everybody's on board and everybody agrees, that's great. But I don't want any surprises. They never seem to work out well for everybody.
I hear you. May I add, this adds a lot, with it being a Brown Act committee, there's going to be an opportunity for public comment. As we move forward, we can decide who's going to be on it as opposed to what's put there. There's 2 more open spots as proposed. We can make this larger or smaller, but it's a point of transparency on how we're progressing. When you have those meetings, they aren't closed doors like the ad hoc committee meetings. Not that there was anything hidden on that, and I appreciate the progress that was done in our ad hoc. But these are a matter of meetings that are for public consumption, and notes will be taken, and people may attend as they are happening. So I think there's the added layer of transparency. I definitely think with the public is a benefit that needs to be considered as we move forward also. Mr. Toffenel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Jack, for making the statements you said. It was part of the question I had, which I already knew the answer, but I was trying to go a different route. I do have some questions, again, for Sarah. Once we establish this committee, they are a standalone committee. In other words, if they, going by what the initial that Krista's put on here on her PowerPoint, on their initial agenda for their initial meeting, establishing their own bylaws, none of that has to come to the board. A third-party facilitator, which I don't understand what that is, if that's a cost. Is there going to be finances for this committee, the standalone committee? Are we going to put together a specific budget for it? So
I will let Ms. Von Latta speak to budget pieces. I can tell you that while this while this would be a standalone committee, it still is an advisory committee. It only has the power or authority which this board chooses to delegate to it or not. If we're talking about financial and budgetary decisions, that's something that would always have to come back to this board. This committee could make recommendations or explore things and bring information back to the board, but that authority always rests with the Board of Supervisors. With respect to bylaws, that is a very common, most committees and commissions in the county and in other jurisdictions have, or at least should have, bylaws which govern their operation. It's fairly typical for the committee to develop its bylaws, and then those frequently would come back to the Board of Supervisors for adoption or ratification. And that certainly the board could absolutely dictate that happen, that this committee develop its bylaws and then those come back to this board to potentially make changes to prior to adopting them. I think I covered your questions, but
no, you did. The budgetary thing, though, I wasn't where I was going. I was going when I see a third-party facilitator, that's going to cost money. And so we're not discussing establishing any budget for this at this time, at this committee at this time. So
correct. So you're absolutely right. That's not something that's on the table today at this time. In private or previous conversations with Ms. Von Latta, and we had discussed the possibility of that being something that this committee may think is useful for them in their operations or not, and that if they did think that retaining some sort of consultant or third-party administrator, whatever we want to call that, is useful, that's something that could basically be a recommendation or an ask that they would have to obviously come back to this board with, and you're absolutely correct. That would have to be funded by this board.
One other question. Since we've gone through this and what's here in front of us, it doesn't really establish by the board any real guidelines for this Brown Act committee, and it's going to be an ongoing, once it's established, it's going to be ongoing. It's not going to end unless the board decides to end it. So it could go on for many years. Then again, going back to my question about the bylaws, and at that time, or even bringing this back to us, establish the committee now, but bring it back to us for a discussion on some guidelines, some more accurate guidelines for this committee, which is along the lines of what Jack was bringing up, so it doesn't go sideways or whatever, and especially looking at what bylaws that they establish. Not saying there's something's going to be established that is out there, but I'm just bringing it back to the board for their consideration, and then some possible guidelines we can have for the committee itself.
Yes, and I don't want to speak for the administrative office, but I would think that if there were things that a majority of the board wanted to convey today that were important to them in the formation of this committee and or the future bylaws, those could absolutely be communicated and incorporated. And then again, once this committee, if it is formed, meets and does develop its bylaws, that would come back and the board could absolutely give further direction or clarification.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
To follow up on the facilitator, it was the conversation we had putting this item together. It wasn't the only solution that was discussed then. There's also, from a prior employee, there's 10% of a deputy CAO position that was right now is a salary savings, although, we're withholding that within the 5% cut that we did this year. When we bring that back forward, there's other ways, it doesn't need to be a third-party facilitator. It may be a part-time position that we may include. There's different ideas about it that will have to come back before the board. We just wanted that in there to give the idea as part of the discussion on formation. Ms. Fullendorf?
And also, with strategic planning, you want opinions that are not influenced, and in order to get that, there are times when part of the strategic plan, you're going to need a neutral party, to whether that be polling, outreach to the public, because if that was us in a regular board meeting, we're going to be told what we want to hear, not necessarily what we need to hear. And so what does that look like? And do we need a facilitator and part-time? And that's part of where that item came and stemmed from, is to get an unbiased opinion in the future when we're trying to give feedback, and also internally. If we were to go ask a staff member, they're going to tell us what they think, not what we really need to hear to make the appropriate decisions we want to bring the county forward. So that's kind of where that stemmed from. It could be any way. It's just, what does that look like? If that's helpful.
I think it is. Ms. Callaway, your light's on?
Yes, it has been, thank you.
My apologies.
Yeah, well, I will tell you, it's been on.
The whole time?
The whole time.
I know. And
Yeah, and you've totally ignored it.
This is untrue. You started out today.
I really appreciate Mr. Garamendi being respectful of the fact that we are a board and decisions are made as a board. And I would probably say the history and the culture of this board has been never to do anything like this, because we are a board. And I think it's time that we do something different. And I totally respect this, and I respect the fact that I at least asked Ms. Flowendorf and Mr. Garamendi to be on it, because I thought that they would be respectful of the fact that we are a board. And we need to try something new. And as Mr. Stopper said and Mrs. Flowendorf said, we're just going to be talking about this another 6 months or a year from now if we don't do something different. So I really support the concept that we're doing. And to address some of the concerns, I guess I would like to see a sunset maybe in 2 years or 3 years, however we want to pick it, so that it is reviewed to see if there is still a need. And that might take the edge off of it. That's all.
Thank you, Ms. Callaway. Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Callaway. I agree with Supervisor Callaway. I think a sunset's important. I mean, we're experimenting on something new for this board. We haven't tried before. I might make it an annual renewal, maybe for a January meeting when we select who serves on what committee. I think this has great opportunity. It's also it's obviously new, and it's got a relative amount of risk. And if it goes sideways, I really don't want a zombie committee. So, I don't know, that would be the only modification to Marita's point, is have a little shorter timeline. But I think the idea is valid, very valid. Thank you.
So what I'm hearing from the board right now is, for the most part, there is the appetite to do this. My suggestion on, with this discussion is, to bring it back before the board again with addressing the bylaws for the authority. The question on the facilitator, to bring on, whether or not to have one, and what does that look like? Whether it's a third party or if it's someone in-house that is, part-time on that and then works elsewhere. And which is the best course to that to address, Ms. Fullendorf's issues on being able to get, proper input from employees and people within the community. And then also a sunset date. I think that's an excellent suggestion, as we move forward, this committee may or may not work. And it may not be a sunset date. It may be a decision that's, look, it's working. Let's continue on with it, or let's make some adjustments, so it can facilitate to a better degree what the board intends at that point. I think that's a great suggestion. So is there any other further input? Do we want to make a decision to move forward with this today and then bring it back to finalize as the board with certain adjustments and more information has been requested? Mr. Toffanelli.
Yeah, one of the other things that Jack brought up, that we add this to our January board meeting when we choose who's going to be on the committees. That I don't think you'd mentioned there. He said sunset, but he did bring up the fact that we could reappoint other supervisors annually when we do that.
Annual reappointment. Good.
I mean, that's part of the discussion that,
Reappointment.
An appointment, not a reappointment, because you may not want the same people on there.
Yeah. This is true. Annual appointment. So do we want, is there a motion or a recommendation by the board for direction?
I move we establish a standing ground. Well, it wasn't looked at before. I don't know what difference it makes. Establish a standing Brown Act committee, strategic and financial planning. Appoint Supervisor Toffanelli and Supervisor Garamendi to said committee.
Ms. Fullendorf, please. You said Toffanelli.
Oh, God, wash my mouth out. Supervisor Fullendorf and Supervisor Garamendi to the committee, and the county administrative officer, auditor, controller, tax collector to said committee. As a sidebar, I think the sunset is the direction given from the board to our two supervisors, that could be part of the bylaws or whatever. I don't think that's something we need to include. That's sort of direction, and let them work that out. If not, we won't appoint them.
I'll give the opportunity. Is there a second or possible amendment to that?
Well,
Suggestion?
I'm a little unclear on, so your motion is to establish the committee per what's in front of us, with the exception that the committee itself and their bylaws put a sunset date on it.
I guess I look at that as one of the housekeeping issues that they can put together in terms of if they do bylaws that, I mean, we might be at every meeting saying we'd like you to consider this or this, that we don't need to micromanage it at this point in time, that we establish the committee, we pick the members of the committee, and then I think the two supervisors have heard us loud and clear. We don't need to tell them what to do.
Okay, there was a suggestion to have them, the supervisors for this committee, appointed annually.
Yeah, that's fine.
You don't, so is that part of
They
your, can
no,
you?
That's part, to me, that's a housekeeping issue, and they can
Well, I
make
think that's a
that-
board issue. You spoke of us being a board.
Right.
And I think that part of it has nothing to do with the committee itself.
That's fine. I will amend the motion to include that it is looked at every year at committee appointments.
Okay, so you make that amendment.
I will make that amendment.
I'll second.
All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Passes on a 5-0 vote of the board. At this time, we'll move on to supervisor announcements. In compliance with Government Code 53232.3D, board members shall provide brief reports on any meetings attended at the expense of the local agency and may make other announcements or report out. We'll start off with you, Mr. Garamendi. Ms. Callaway.
At LAFCO last night, we approved the McCollum Hill Sanitary District Sphere of Influence and their municipal service review. Supervisor Germany, it's really, considering the size, it's well-run. The only recommendation is they have an irrigation field that we thought at some point in time, the LAFCO had, would maybe like to annex that into, it's in their sphere, but annex that into their area. So the other is the annexation of about 80 acres parcel for one domestic connection into the Calaveras Public Utility District. That's all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Callaway. Mr. Toffanelli. Ms. Fullendorf. I also want to know. So at this time, we're going to go back into closed session, at which, once we're done with closed session, we will come back out and report closed session at the end of the day, so we aren't officially done with our meeting. So, closed session. Thank you, Ms. Simpson. We good to go? Welcome back to the March 16, 2021 special meeting for the final time today. We will be reporting out on closed session. Madam Clerk.
One moment. Sheriff Hubbard.
Will we be starting over again? Amanda, will you be fine without your interpreters for the report out? Yeah, she's familiar with what's going on. So we start again?
Yes, please.
Welcome back to the Tuesday, March 16, 2021 special meeting of the Calaveras County Board of Supervisors for the final time today. We will be reporting out for closed session. Madam Clerk.
Report of closed session, item 1, public employment pursuant to Government Code 54956B1, titles Health and Human Services Agency Director, Public Works Director, Planning Director, Board action, no reportable action. Item 2, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, 1K, significant exposure to litigation pursuant to Government Code 54956.9B2. Board action, no reportable action. Item 3, public employment pursuant to Government Code 54657B1, title County Administrative Officer. Board action, Albert Alt tendered his resignation effective June 2nd, 2021, which the board accepted by unanimous vote of Supervisors Tofanelli, Garamendi, Callaway, Fallendorf, and Stopper. Mr. Alt and the board mutually agreed that he would utilize existing leave until the resignation date. The board wishes Mr. Alt well in all his future endeavors. Item 4, public employment pursuant to Government Code 54657B1, title Acting or Interim County Administrative Officer. Board action, the board directed Judy Hawkins to bring forward a resolution at the board's next regular meeting appointing Krista Von Latta as interim CAO.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. This concludes the special meeting of March 16, 2021. You all have a wonderful day. Thank you.